August 7th, 1944, Argentan, France, 3:47 in the morning. The explosion lit up the sky for 3 miles. A Sherman tank, 60,000 pounds of American steel, had just been turned into a funeral pyre in under a second. The round punched clean through the front armor like it wasn't even there, found the ammunition inside, and that was it. 4 men, gone, not wounded, not captured, gone. The Germans didn't even slow down. And then it happened again. 7 Shermans, 11 minutes, 1 Tiger tank. The German crew never moved their position. They didn't need to. They just sat there, on that French road, and systematically dismantled everything we sent at them. I was 3 columns back when the radio crackled with the news. I remember the voice of the operator, flat, controlled. The kind of flat that means a man is holding something back that he can't afford to let out. 7 vehicles lost, no enemy casualties confirmed. No enemy casualties. I had been in France long enough by then to understand what that meant. It meant we were not fighting a tank. We were fighting a mathematical equation, and we were on the wrong side of it. My name is James Walker, and I need to tell you what happened next, because nobody else is going to tell it the way it actually was. I grew up in rural Ohio. My father ran a repair shop outside Columbus, the kind of place where the floors were permanently stained with grease and the smell of motor oil got into your clothes so deep your mother couldn't wash it out. By the time I was 12, I could diagnose a transmission problem by sound alone, not by looking at it, by listening to it. That's the thing about machines. They tell you what's wrong with them. You just have to know how to listen. When I enlisted in 1942, the Army took one look at my file and put me in the motor pool. Keeping vehicles running. Maintenance duty. I transferred 3 times trying to get into a tank crew, twice rejected. The 3rd time, a sergeant with a shortage of experienced loaders took a chance on me, and I never looked back. By early 1944, I was a tank commander in the 4th Armored Division, one of Patton's hardest driving units. I had fought in the grinding misery of the hedgerow country, where visibility was measured in yards and every road bend might be your last. I had learned to read terrain the way I once read engines, patiently, carefully, looking for the thing that didn't fit. I had also, by that summer, fought tigers twice. I lost my first tank to one outside St. Lo, watched my loader burn trying to get out of the hatch. The second encounter, we survived by reversing behind a farmhouse and screaming for artillery. We hadn't done anything right. We had just been lucky. After that second encounter, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark and thought about the tiger, the way I used to think about a stubborn diesel engine that kept seizing up on cold mornings. I didn't ask what made it powerful. I asked what made it break. Here's what nobody on my side of the war fully understood yet. The tiger was perfect, sitting still. Let me say that again because it matters more than anything else in this story. The tiger, that 56-ton monster with 4 inches of frontal armor and an 80mm gun that could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away, was perfect when it wasn't moving. But I had been watching tigers fail, not in combat, in movement. In the past month alone, I had personally seen 2 tigers abandon their positions without being touched by a single American round. One threw a track on a sharp turn. One had a transmission failure pulling out of a field. I had managed to get an interpreter and talk to a captured German maintenance crew, asking questions that no officer had thought to ask. What I learned changed everything I believed about armored warfare. Tigers required maintenance intervals every 1,000 kilometers. The transmission was so mechanically complex it could only be replaced at rear area facilities. A tiger moving at speed across rough terrain was putting enormous stress on a drivetrain that was never designed for sustained rapid movement. Their weakness wasn't where you aimed your gun. Their weakness was the clock. Force a tiger to move constantly, deny it the ability to find a hull-down position and sit. And you weren't just fighting its armor anymore. You were fighting its engineering. You were fighting the hours building up inside its drivetrain, the fuel burning in its tanks, the maintenance debt accumulating with every kilometer of forced repositioning. I brought this idea to Lieutenant Harris on the evening of August 9th. He listened, then he told me I was out of my mind. "Walker, you're describing a battle where our job is to not fight," he said. "No, sir," I answered. "Our job is to make them fight a battle they can't win." He told me to go back to my tank. He told me that if I tried to implement this independently, he'd have me brought up on charges. He used the words court-martial clearly and without hesitation. I went back to my tank, but I didn't forget. What happened on August 11th was equal parts desperation and something I still don't have a clean word for. My company was assigned a forward screening mission. Push ahead of the main column, identify German positions, report back. We made contact with a Tiger just before dusk, on an open road outside a village whose name I never learned and probably couldn't have pronounced anyway. Standard response: halt, call it in, wait. I didn't halt. I ordered my driver left, off the road, into the tree line. I got on the radio and called for smoke from the artillery unit 3 miles behind us. Then I called the other 2 Shermans in my section and told them to do the one thing every instinct in their training told them not to do. Scatter, don't bunch up, move in different directions. Force the Tiger's turret to choose a target. The smoke landed imperfect, about 200 yards east of where I wanted it. But it was enough. 90 seconds of degraded visibility. In those 90 seconds, my driver pushed through a hedgerow gap and we came out at a 45-degree angle to the Tiger's left side. Not the front, the flank. My gunner put 3 rounds into the track assembly and lower hull at under 300 yards. The first 2 didn't penetrate. The third found the gap between the hull and the track housing. The Tiger didn't explode, it just stopped. The crew bailed out 30 seconds later. 1 Tiger, no American tanks lost. I sat in my turret afterward and thought about what had just happened. It wasn't the rounds that killed that Tiger. It was the movement, the smoke, the forced choice. The crew had been tracking one of the other Shermans so intently that they hadn't adjusted fast enough when I appeared on their flank. That night I wrote a 4-page after-action report by flashlight. My handwriting, someone later told me, was barely legible. I submitted it through official channels the next morning. Within 48 hours, that report had traveled up 3 levels of command. I want to tell you about the moment I understood what was actually at stake, not just for me, for all of it. German High Command had made a decision that the historians will argue about for generations. Commit the Tigers, all of them. 72 of Germany's most feared heavy tanks, rushing directly into Patton's path to create a blocking force so powerful, so armored, so mathematically lethal that even the most aggressive American general in the European theater would shatter against it. On paper, it should have worked. Their intelligence reports were perfect, their positioning was textbook, their firepower was overwhelming. They were betting that American armor would do what American armor had always done, drive straight at the problem and absorb the losses. What they didn't know was that a mechanic from Ohio had spent 2 sleepless nights asking a different question. And what they couldn't have known was that the man who read my barely legible report had a direct line to Patton's planning staff. His name doesn't matter here. What matters is what he did with 4 pages of cramped handwriting from a tank corporal who had never read Clausewitz and barely graduated high school. He read it 3 times. Then he picked up a field telephone. Patton's planners worked through the night. Artillery response protocols were rewritten. Tank destroyer positioning was revised. Close air support priorities were realigned. The doctrine I had sketched out by flashlight in a French field, suppress, smoke, scatter, flank, attack their supply before you ever fire at their armor, was being translated into executable orders for an entire army. The 72 Tigers were already moving into position. They had no idea what was coming. The first American artillery barrage hit Tiger positions before dawn on August 14th, not aimed at destroying them, aimed at suppressing them, forcing hatches closed, cutting visibility, making crews button up inside tanks that suddenly became isolated, suffocating metal boxes where commanders couldn't see what was happening around them. While the Tigers were buttoned up, American tank destroyers were moving, M10s and M36s, faster than Shermans, carrying guns specifically engineered to penetrate German heavy armor at side angles, were pushing through terrain the German planners had marked as impassable. They were wrong. American engineers had been quietly clearing that route for 6 hours. The first Tiger died before a single American round touched it. Repositioning under artillery pressure, the driver made a sharp turn in soft ground. The left track seized. The crew spent 20 minutes trying to free it. P-47 Thunderbolts arrived before they succeeded, 3 rockets. The tank burned for 2 hours. The second Tiger ran out of fuel. The supply convoy meant to reach it had been destroyed by American fighter bombers 12 hours earlier. The crew sat in a powerless Tiger for 40 minutes while American forces pushed past them on 3 sides. They surrendered to an infantry sergeant who didn't even have an anti-tank weapon. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th Tigers were killed in under 8 minutes by tank destroyers that had reached flanking positions during the night. Patton's main force never stopped moving, not for a single hour. By nightfall of the first day, more than 20 Tigers were destroyed or abandoned. German commanders were sending increasingly desperate radio messages requesting infantry support, air cover, resupply. Those messages were being answered with silence or confusion. Patton's advance had already disrupted the German command network behind the Tiger positions. Requests sent to units that no longer existed. Responses arriving 6 hours too late. A perfect defensive plan, collapsing in real time because the offensive tempo it was designed to stop was simply too fast. But then came the moment nobody expected. On the morning of August 15th, a staff car pulled up near my position at 06:30. A colonel I had never seen before climbed out with a folder of papers and a jaw like a concrete block. He found me eating cold rations beside my tank. "Corporal Walker." He didn't sit. "You submitted a report recommending that armored units avoid direct engagement with superior enemy armor." "No, sir," I said carefully. "I recommended that we change the terms of engagement so the enemy's armor superiority becomes irrelevant. That is the same thing. With respect, Colonel, the results suggest otherwise." He slapped the report against his thigh. The sound echoed off the hull of my tank. "You lost 3 Shermans yesterday using your methods." "We lost 3 Shermans and destroyed 11 Tigers, sir. Standard doctrine yesterday destroyed 0 Tigers and lost 9 Shermans in a single column engagement." Silence. He stared at me for a long moment. Long enough that I began calculating whether my next assignment would involve engine oil rather than ammunition. "You are a corporal," he said finally. "You are not a doctrine writer. You will return to standard operating procedures, or I will have you pulled from your tank and reassigned to motor pool duty for the remainder of this campaign. Are we clear?" I looked past him at the smouldering field half a mile away. 11 Tigers that had never moved again after encountering what my platoon had done. "Crystal clear, sir." I waited until his jeep disappeared around a tree line. Then I found a field telephone. The person I called was a captain on Patton's planning staff, an intelligence analyst who had been the one to make the original call after reading my report. She had no official authority over armor doctrine, but she had something more valuable. She had the ear of Brigadier General Ernest, commander of Combat Command A, the man who had driven his units harder and faster than any other formation in the Third Army. I told her what had happened. "I know," she said. "Give me 6 hours." 6 hours later, an order came down from Combat Command. My platoon-level tactics were to be tested in a formal, observed engagement. Full documentation. staff officers watching in real time, including two who worked directly for the colonel who had just threatened me with reassignment. One engagement, one chance, no margin for error. The German second wave arrived faster than anticipated. By 0500 on August 16th, reconnaissance reported a reinforced German column, 47 vehicles including Tigers, Panzerfours, and half-tracks carrying infantry, less than 8 miles from my position. This wasn't a controlled test. This was the real thing. And Ernest had decided to use the actual engagement as the formal evaluation. Every decision I made would be observed by 6 staff officers. 2 of them were waiting for me to fail. The weather was heavy, overcast. Cloud ceiling at 200 feet, low enough to ground the P-47s. One of my 5 core tactics, fighter-bomber coordination, was neutralized before I fired a single round. I spent the 30 minutes before contact doing something no tank commander in the sector had done before. I drove a jeep across the entire terrain feature and timed how long it took to traverse each section. I noted where the ground was soft, where a tracked vehicle would bog, where the angles of approach forced a predictable line of movement. I came back and repositioned my tank destroyers. At 0623, the German column entered the valley. I didn't target the Tigers. I called artillery on the supply half-tracks at the rear of the column, the vehicles carrying fuel. 3 concentrations simultaneously. The German column's fuel supply was burning a mile behind their combat vehicles before a single gun had been aimed at their armor. The German commander made the decision I had anticipated. Push the Tigers forward. Get past the American position. Get to ground where artillery couldn't touch them without risking friendly forces. It was the tactically sound response. It was exactly what I needed them to do. Tigers moving fast on uncertain terrain, Tigers burning fuel they couldn't replace. Eyes forward, tracking the Sherman positions I had deliberately set up as bait on the ridgeline. The tank destroyers had been moving for 22 minutes. At 6:49, both M36s opened fire from a 60-degree angle on the lead Tiger's right flank. Range, 380 yards. First round penetrated, second round penetrated and detonated the ammunition. The Tiger stopped moving permanently in under 4 seconds. The second Tiger swung its turret to engage the tank destroyers, and in doing so, exposed its left flank to the 2 Shermans everyone had assumed were sitting bait. They weren't bait anymore. 41 seconds after the first Tiger died, the second was immobilized. The crew abandoned it 60 seconds later, leaving a 56-ton machine that had never been outgunned sitting useless in a French field because it had run out of options, not armor. Total engagement time, 31 minutes. American losses, 0 tanks. The colonel's observer, the major who had been standing by his radio jeep waiting for this to fail, stood without speaking for a very long time. The numbers didn't require commentary. Before my approach, nearly 4 Shermans lost per Tiger destroyed. That morning, on one ridgeline in France, in front of 6 witnesses, 2 Tigers destroyed, 0 Shermans lost. The colonel formally withdrew his objection at 1100 hours that same day. By August 17th, Combat Command A issued revised engagement protocols incorporating my 5 principles across all armored units in the division. By August 19th, the protocols had been forwarded to 3rd Army headquarters. Patton's staff reviewed them and issued a theater-wide advisory, not a mandate, but a strong recommendation that all armored commanders study the approach before their next engagement with heavy German armor. Across 15 engagements in the final week of August, the ratio held. 0.8 American tanks lost per Tiger destroyed, compared to the 3.8 average that had defined armored combat since Normandy. German Tiger crews began refusing engagements, not officially, but field reports and prisoner interrogations documented the pattern. Tiger commanders who identified they were facing coordinated suppression and flanking approaches were requesting permission to withdraw, reporting mechanical issues requiring rear area attention. The psychological impact of being hunted in a tank that was supposed to be the hunter was dismantling German armored confidence at an accelerating rate. Fewer than 10 Tigers survived the campaign intact. The rest were destroyed, abandoned, captured, or blown up by their own desperate crews, and Patton's Third Army never, not for a single hour, slowed its advance. On September 1st, 1944, I was promoted to sergeant by direct order of Brigadier General Ernest. The citation was 3 sentences. It described my contribution as tactical innovation under fire, resulting in measurable improvement in armored engagement effectiveness. The most understated commendation in the Third Army's files. Patton apparently read it, said nothing, then asked his aide to find out who had written the 4-page after-action report that started everything. The aide came back 20 minutes later with a file. Patton read it, put it down, looked out at the French countryside moving past his command vehicle. "Get me that sergeant," he said. By the time the order reached the forward units, I was already gone, transferred at my own request back to the most forward element, back to my tank, back to the advance that was still moving, still hunting, still refusing to stop. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. I was in a motor pool outside Kassel when it did. Not in Berlin, not at any of the places where history was being formally concluded. I was doing what I had always done, fixing engines. My unit had been reassigned to occupation support duties 6 weeks before the German surrender. I was discharged in October 1945. I received a sergeant's separation pay, a decoration that was technically the wrong one for an armored soldier, and a bus ticket from New York to Columbus, Ohio. The field commission to second lieutenant that Patton had apparently ordered, the paperwork existed, I was told decades later, the signature line was blank, was never processed. Nobody could explain why. I went home to my father's shop. He was older, slower, needed help with the heavy work. I stepped back in without ceremony and fixed engines and charged fair prices and knew my customers by name. I never talked about France, not because nobody deserved to hear it, because nobody asked the right questions. Here is what happened to the doctrine. The 1946 Armored Doctrine Revision drew heavily on Third Army after-action reports from August and September 1944. The tactical innovations were incorporated into training curricula at Fort Knox. They were studied, built upon, spread through the armored warfare curriculum that would train the next generation of American tank commanders. The name attached to those innovations was not James Walker. The official language credited tactical innovations developed through combat command, a operational experience. No individual attribution, no corporal from Ohio. The institutional logic was straightforward, if quietly brutal. Doctrine belongs to the army, not to the soldier who observed it. Colonel Hartwick, the man who had threatened me with reassignment, retired in 1952 as a brigadier general. His official biography cited his role in armored doctrine development in the European theater. The irony was not noted anywhere in the public record. In a 1971 oral history interview, the intelligence analyst who had taken my report to Ernest, the woman whose phone call had changed everything, mentioned a tank corporal whose after-action report should have had his name on a lot more than it did. The interviewer didn't follow up. The tape sat in an archive for decades. Brigadier General Ernest died in 1963. His papers were donated to the Army War College. Among them was a handwritten note, undated, that read, "The Walker Protocols saved more American armor in the last 60 days of the French campaign than any single piece of equipment we fielded. The man deserved a commission and got a bus ticket." History will correct this eventually. History did not correct it quickly. Military historians who have studied the engagement data from the final 60 days of Patton's French campaign estimate that the tactical shift saved somewhere between 800 and 1,200 American lives. That estimate is conservative. It doesn't account for the secondary effects. Patton's advance moving faster, reaching objectives sooner, cutting off German units before they could establish defensive positions that would have required costly frontal assaults. Speed in that war was measured in lives. Every day the war ran shorter was measured in men who came home. The principles I had worked out sitting in the dark after 2 near-death encounters with tigers, suppress rather than destroy, force movement, attack logistics before armor, use combined arms to create simultaneous insoluble threats, became the foundational logic of American combined arms doctrine through Korea and into Vietnam. In Korea, American armor faced North Korean T-34s, Soviet-designed tanks that, like Tigers, held technical advantages in many direct engagement scenarios. Units that applied coordinated suppression and flanking approaches consistently outperformed units that sought frontal engagements. The loss ratios echoed France in 1944. Not because those commanders had read my name. They hadn't. It wasn't there to read. But the doctrine was in their training. My fingerprints were on every page of it. By 1970, 43 nations had incorporated combined arms suppression and flanking doctrine into their armored warfare training. None of them knew a mechanic from Columbus had sketched the framework by flashlight in a French field. I died in Columbus, Ohio in 1987. I was 71 years old. I had run my father's repair shop until 1978, then retired. I had a daughter and 2 grandchildren. My obituary in the Columbus Dispatch was 4 sentences. It mentioned my military service and listed my survivors. It did not mention Tigers. It did not mention France. It did not mention a 4-page report written by flashlight on paper, still creased from being folded into a jacket pocket. When a military history researcher tracked down my daughter years later, after the archive discovery that surfaced the original document, the actual handwritten original, not the transcription that had traveled up the chain of command, she said her father had known in a general way that something he'd written had been used. He hadn't known the specifics. He hadn't known the scale. He had told her once, near the end of his life, that the most important thing he had ever fixed wasn't an engine. She had asked him what it was. The way they were thinking about the problem, he said. The Tigers were built to be invincible. They were beaten by a man who understood that invincible things still need fuel, still need time, still break down when you make them move faster than they were designed to go. That is not a lesson about tanks. It is a lesson about every problem that has ever looked too big to solve from where you are standing. The most important tactical insight in any given moment might be sitting inside the head of the lowest-ranking person who has spent the most time actually watching the problem. Not the general, not the doctrine writer, the mechanic who asked why the transmission kept failing. 72 Tigers came for Patton's army. Fewer than 10 survived. And the man most responsible for that outcome went home on a bus, stepped back into his father's shop, and fixed engines for 30 more years without a single headline. History filed him under the wrong name, but the doctrine carried his fingerprints on every page, and now, finally, you know whose hands wrote it.